go on. So Tennyson is a very different character, and his writing is very different. He is the poet laureate, which means that he is the official poet of Britain for most of Queen Victoria's reign. And Queen Victoria is a very important figure in terms of Canadian identity, but even British identity, because her reign basically encompasses the Industrial Revolution and the expansion of the British Empire. There is already a British Empire, but it expands under her reign as well. And so such that she is no longer just the monarch of Great Britain, but also the empress of the British Empire. And so in some ways, if you recall last semester, we looked at Virgil's Aeneid, and we looked at the claims of Caesar Augustus to be ushering in a Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. And he did it through military victory. So during the time in which Virgil writes his Aeneid, the very same time in which Jesus enters human history, God decides to send his Redeemer right under Augustus Caesar, the one who claims to be the Lord of Lords, and wants a pinch of incense to be offered on the fire to proclaim that he is a deity just like the other deities, and has the imperial might to enforce that Caesar worship. Here we have a similar sort of text and a sort of a peace, because under the British Empire, there is a great deal of civilization that's spread as a result of modern science, as a result of, to some degree, Christianity, the manners and the I would say even to some degree the ethics of the British Empire. Remember, Britain abolishes slavery under William Wilberforce before Canada was even started. It's totally abolished from the British Empire. Canada comes into existence in 1867 as a nation. Slavery had been abolished for a good 40 odd years by that point. Maybe getting the date wrong, but thereabouts. And the Civil War, which was going to be fought south of the border, was just in and around the same time in Canada. So our American cousins to the south of the border were having to resolve the issue of slavery, and they were going to commit a civil war over that with untold casualties and consequences to this very day. But in Canada and the British Empire, this had already been dealt with in a sense. And so Victoria's Britain was in a sense on the cusp of what could be called, just like with Augustus Caesar, a golden age. Because now Britain is not like it was in the Roman days around Europe, because Rome under Caesar Augustus is all over known Europe and extends out into what we would call the Middle East, Asia Minor, pushes over there, and also around the Mediterranean into Africa and so forth, northern Africa. That's where the Roman Empire is. It's pretty much the entire known world. Likewise, Victoria is now operating with a global British Empire. Let's see here if I can put Britain under. Let's just show you on a map, give you a sense of this. Is this it? Yeah, this will be a good one. I don't want to see Queen Victoria. I want to see the map. That's not very helpful. Unblank. There you go. All the red. This is when Queen Victoria dies in 1900. All the red on the map of the globe is the British Empire. And as it says here, at its height, it's 450 million people. That's a quarter of the world's population. And you can see it's not in the proximity of Britain, but it is truly global. So with that, and with the sense of a power that is unprecedented as the product of to some degree, modern technology, because what allows Britain to go global and to have that sort of power is the power of the British Navy. There's a song that they sang at the proms last night. The proms, "Rule Britannia." Britannia ruled the waves. So the Navy is the means by which the British Empire is secured and provided for, and there's trade going on and so forth. As I say, from Canada and South America and Africa and India and Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, etc. A lot of trade going on back and forth, and with it, culture goes along with it. And so there's a sense of an unprecedented responsibility that has been placed on the shoulders of this small little island nation off the northwest coast of continental Europe. And with that, then a difficulty of how do we actually understand ourselves then to operate here? Because again, the precedence for Christians is going to be laid down in Scripture. And it's interesting that not long before this, William Carey and the Baptist missionaries would go to India and bring the gospel to India, the consequences of which are also transformational there. But they don't do it to bring the British Empire. They do it to bring the gospel. So there's a worldwide missionary movement that happens in the late 18th century that also overlaps with this. It's not the same thing, I need to say. There's an overlap here, but there's a conflicting motivation. To bring the gospel to people is not the same thing as to wish to exert power over them or control or dominion. Or if it is dominion, it's dominion related to the dominion mandate, which is re-articulated by Jesus, which is to make disciples of all nations. Right? And that's why Carey goes on his mission trips to India, and others will go to Africa with the same thing. Right? And to this day, there are mission organizations related to that come from the pre-Victorian period, but then they really take hold in that. But having said that, there are a lot of problems that go with this, which is, again, as I say, what do we do with this enormous responsibility that has been put into our hands by virtue of providence? And we already know how Virgil dealt with this question if we read the Aeneid last semester. So last semester we looked at the Aeneid, and what Virgil does is he shows the prehistory of the Roman Empire under Caesar Augustus. He gives us the background. How did we get to this point? And he starts with the fall of Troy. Fall of Troy, which is located right here where the pointer is. And how do we get from there all the way to Italy and Rome? And it's the fall of the Trojan Empire, which is the beginning of Aeneas's exile from Troy. He goes to Carthage briefly and ends up in Rome. And then there's a whole story of centuries of battles of supremacy between Carthage and Rome being told in the backdrop here, to the point now, though, where we have the Peace of Rome. What's a British person going to do with this? They could connect it to the Roman story. If you recall in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, there was a reference to Troy. And one of the Brutuses, Felix Brutus, who allegedly, or legend has it, left Rome and went up to Britain and brought with him a culture of freedom, because Brutus was the one who killed Julius Caesar, or at least one of his predecessors, or ancestors rather. And so a connection between the British and the love of freedom and so forth. So that's one way you could connect it, a national identity connected to this vast responsibility. But the more obvious way is the one that Tennyson will choose, which is to connect it with the greatest of the British myths, and that is King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And that's what our poem today will be looking at. It will be revisiting the idea of Arthurian Britain. Now remember, it is a legend. To this day, scholars to some degree debate whether this place actually existed. Whether the king existed, as one king, whether the kingdom existed and where. And if you were going to fall on that, most people think that Arthur's Britain, as it says in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, is probably located in the area that we call Wales. Let me see. I'll just do. Right over here. So somewhere over in here, Arthur's Britain is located. But it's a kingdom associated with certain things. And what's it associated with? It's associated with Christian virtue. It's a golden age. It's the age when there are knights around the round table. It's a round table. It's not hierarchical, in which the king is here and then he has his vassals under his tutelage. There's a sort of a unity there. He's the first among equals, but he is among equals. And there's peace in the kingdom. The Pax Arthuriana, if you will. And it comes through exercising Christian virtue. The knights will go and slay the enemies to the kingdom. And the enemies are not only external, they're also internal. This is the thing, and this is the Christian aspect of it. Their biggest threat is of their own sinful nature. And so remember, going back to Gawain and the Green Knight, we said that Gawain had to exhibit perfect Christian character. That was part of his trial. He didn't just have to beat the Green Knight in physical battle, he had to master himself and exhibit the character of Christ in everything he did. Now that model is there in British culture, and Tennyson and others in his age lay hold of it very strongly. And the idea of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table then figure strongly in how should we, as British, living in a very different age, this age of empire, operate in our day? And the answer is we should be chivalrous. We should model a certain type of values. Christian values, compassion, charity, benevolence. Bring the culture of Britain to the world, not just for the purposes of dominion, but bring that culture with us. At the same time, I'm giving you a lot of at the same time, come the middle of the 19th century, Britain is going through a great religious crisis, such that men like Tennyson are not believers in the very thing which he thinks is needed to save the empire or to rule over it with any sort of justice, namely Christian character. He himself is not one. He has profound doubts about it, and in part because of new ideologies or new discoveries in the modern sciences, among them Darwin's evolution of the species, but also findings in geography and geology, etc. So the sciences are moving against a Christian view, the biblical view, and moving towards one that is charitably, we could say, is different, but actually it's hostile to the view being presented in Scripture. And it will be more like, and again I talked about this last semester as well, it will be more like the view of the early beginnings presented in early mythologies of the Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians, which is that the world began in chaos, and then some power subdued it. But it's fundamentally chaotic. And I said in that lecture, and you should go back and look at it if you weren't with me, comparing Genesis to Ovid's Metamorphoses, that at the end of the day, the fundamental principles of your worldview determine where you are going to go as a culture. And a worldview that begins in chaos is going to embrace chaos. And the irony here then is that Tennyson, while trying to present a view of Arthur and Christian knights, doesn't believe in Christianity, firstly, but also to some degree thinks that chaos is inevitable. And there is a sort of a doom that's also inevitable for the British Empire. And he will talk about the great loss that is only on the horizon. So I'm going to start things differently than I normally do. I'm going to get to the Lady of Shalott, but I want to present Tennyson's great poem, Ulysses. Helps if I could spell. This is a different myth. Ulysses is the Roman name for Odysseus. If you recall, Odysseus, well, I'll tell you the end of the story. Odysseus defeats the suitors. He's in battle at Troy, 10-year battle, and then he has a 10-year homeward voyage. He gets back home, defeats the suitors, and then his story is sort of over, except it's not over, because we're told that at the end of it all, that a Ulysses will have to leave his kingdom, having come back, and he will plant his oar upright in the ground, designating that he's not going to be undergoing any more voyages. But this is the old man Ulysses that Tennyson's talking about here, and I think what he's doing is drawing comparison between the heroic legacy of the great epic hero Ulysses, Odysseus, and the current state of Britain. There's something heroic about what has been thrust into the laps of the British. There's something noble, there's something good. But it's falling apart, it's fracturing even as we seek to grasp it. It's very pessimistic. And yet in there's a commitment to grin and bear it, stiff upper lip. So the Stoic ideals of Victorian Britain, which are rigorously enforced as a sort of a cultural ideal to this day amongst British, by the way, to bear suffering with resilience and no complaint, like Queen Elizabeth, never complain, never explain. Very stoic. That was her motto, personal motto. Let me read Ulysses for you. It is about, obviously, Ulysses, but I think more than that, it's a reflection on Britain. So let me read it. Little profits that an idle king, by this still hearth, among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I mete and dole unequal laws unto a savage race, that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. Ulysses complaining. His own people become savage in his absence. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. Drink life right to the bottom of the cup. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that love me and alone, on shore, and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vexed the dim sea. I am become a name, for always roaming with a hungry heart. Much have I seen and known, cities of men, and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am a part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rest unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things. And vile it were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself, and this gray spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. He doesn't want to go down quietly, hoarding his wealth and dying in his bed. This is my son, my own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle, well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labor, by slow prudence to make mild a rugged people, and through soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good. Most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods when I'm gone. He works his work, I mine. There lies the port. The vessel puffs her sail. There gloom the dark broad seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome look, the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all. But something ere the end, some work of noble note, may yet be done. Not unbecoming men that strove with gods. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in world, in order smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset, and the baths of all the western stars, until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles, and see the great Achilles, whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. It's a great poem. It's about, we want to put it in Christian terms, finishing the race, finishing strong, not going into retirement, not resting on your laurels. But more than anything, it's about, in this case, the British Empire, which is the bequest of heroic men. And we have no more heroes. We're leaving behind bureaucrats, and they may be good men, but they're not those who subdued the earth and brought about the empire. And we're leaving that to them. So this, by the way, if you're these last lines are in a Bond movie. I can't remember which one it was. Judi Dench citing it as a plot unfolds against James Bond and so forth, and he's sort of running through the streets, and the whole world's crashing down and whatever. It's I think it's Skyfall. Great poem, Victorian Britain, reflects something of, so here's the problem. The legacy of heroes is the British Empire. You're in a golden age. Who is going to have the wisdom and the strength to maintain the British Empire if the heroes are all gone? So it's a pass from a heroic age to a administrative bureaucracy. And there's a sense that the strength of the heroes is no longer with us. So a sense of, as I say, dissipation is on the horizon. Comments or questions? How do you like the poem? I love Tennyson. I think he is a brilliant poet. Every word is perfect. So there's the comparison with Ulysses.